This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
So I want to thank you again for joining us on Beyond the Big Screen. Today, we will shoot for the stars and maybe shoot some bugs as we talk about the 1997 film Starship Troopers. This movie is based on the 1959 novel Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. In this episode, Mustache Chris and I will talk about some of the big themes about society and humanity that this film and movie bring up. There are some universal themes that director Paul Verhoeven and the author Robert Heinlein took in very different directions. And I think the very first thing to talk about is, Chris, when did you maybe come about this book? I know I picked it up after the movie. I saw the movie and thought the movie was really cool. And then I read the book, and the book and the movie are really different in a lot of ways. But it's weird. We'll get into it, but I think that for me, it's one of the very best book movie combinations that I've ever seen.
Yeah, which is weird because they're very tonally very different. Like, I came to the Starship Troopers book. I've always been a big fan of Prussian history, and just growing up as a teenager, just reading about like Frederick the Great and the Prussian army. I was always fascinated by it. And through my reading of that, I remember people talking about this book, Starship Troopers. So I read it when I was quite young. And the movie I watched when I was quite young too, and just loved it. I got it right away too. It's weird to me that the reviewers did not get the satire at the time, and like 14-year-old me understood it. I just, you know what I mean? It's crazy when you read the reviews when this movie came out, but I guess people didn't get it.
Yeah, I think talking about the reviews, like the review that I read by Roger Ebert, it was, I think with a lot of Roger Ebert reviews, I don't understand how that guy was so successful, because he misses the point so often. And if you go and read his review of this movie, he missed the point of the book and he missed the point of the movie entirely.
Oh, yeah, I read that review and I was blown. Like, I read a couple of reviews just to get a feel why this movie didn't do very well when it first came out. And I can't understand how people didn't get what Paul Verhoeven was doing. And I mean, he had a track record of doing this type of satirical sci-fi action movie where like RoboCop's right there, and Total Recall's, it's slightly different, but it still has this similar kind of elements. And I don't get it. Maybe people are just, because this is coming off Showgirls, and maybe people are just upset about Showgirls and then just continued on to Starship Troopers, but that's the only explanation I can probably think of.
Yeah, I'm not some film nerd who went to film school or anything, and you can see it a mile away that he's making satirical cuts here. I mean, if you go into it, I guess literally, or you're expecting just like Star Wars or something, then you're just never going to get it, the point. But when you can see that it's clearly satire and it's clearly commentary on society, like, hello, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's not even subtle, really. Like the uniforms, and I mean, you could just watch it even if you didn't care for the satire. Like, I would argue you could just watch this as a straight sci-fi action movie and it's still great, right? But I mean, to really get it, to really appreciate it, you have to get the satire, and I don't know, it's not very subtle. I just don't understand how people didn't get it at the time.
And I mentioned it before, but I think that maybe up front it's worth saying that this was really such a great I think that and it probably lends more towards the screenwriter, Ed Neumeyer. He read the book, and apparently you were saying in the notes is that Verhoeven read a couple of chapters of the book and didn't really uh go much beyond that. But I think that the screenwriter, he really understood the book, and I think he really understood how to take the book and put it onto film.
Yeah, that's what I read. I read Paul Verhoeven read like 2 or 3 chapters, and he was like, "Oh, this is just right wing military." Like he just thought it was boring, and he got. I mean, to be honest with you, the book is not. It's a fun read for me, but I can see why people reading the book and be like, "This is kind of boring," because it's like long passages about like just military stuff that I guess some people wouldn't find interesting, but personally I love the book, but I can see why some people might find it boring. Yeah, but Ed really understood how to take the book and turn it into a movie, because I don't think if you were to do the book as a movie, the like as faithfully, I guess, because they change a lot of things in Starship Troopers, but they keep a lot of things. I don't think it would have really worked. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, the book is really, it's a lot of it is a military training manual. They go into a lot of not even just space military and sci-fi military, of actual military, the way you train a soldier and the way you train an officer, and the differences between how officers are trained and how enlisted soldiers are trained, and how somebody grows through the ranks of being a private to a corporal to a sergeant, even how much they get into I think there was entire chapters about just how units are organized, and that it doesn't you don't need to put that in a film, and it would never work in a film. But I think that Neumeyer condensed that enough, and to show the difference between the mobile infantry, the infantry component, and then the Navy component, and that hatred that there is between them, and the service rivalries. All that stuff came through in a way that it didn't have to be preachy, or I mean, there was very little narration either. Even there was the only narration was that news reporter that they would cut in with on the news feeds to give us like any exposition, and that was really just, I thought, a clever way of doing transitions from one act of the film to the next.
Yeah, I think he really got this idea where the Starship Troopers in the book, you're following Johnny Rico, and you're seeing through his eyes the Federation, how society runs in the Federation. Where Ed decided, well, how do I make a movie out of this and make it fun and exciting? I'm gonna do a movie about how the Federation would view itself. Is the way I think he is the genesis of his screenplay. I mean, and that's how the movie is the movie's about how the Federation wants the rest of us to view it, with Paul Verhoeven's satire mixed into it, whereas the book is you're just following an individual soldier basically traversing or navigating this society that Robert created.
A big part of the whole novel really was Robert Heinlein, and just through narration of explaining how, well, Johnny Rico tells the story, but it's really just a exposition or an essay on Johnny living in this quasi-militaristic fascist, you might say. We'll dive into that more a bit, but this really very different society as a super rich kid, and how it changes when he gets knocked down to the bottom of the rung in the military, and then how he views the whole society as his growth through there, and then he views the military and the society as an officer through another lens. And it's you didn't need to do that in the movie, and I don't think that would have been a very interesting movie to begin with, unless it was a very different movie. But I think that Neumeyer pulled out the action, which was cool, which there wasn't much action really in the book. There was really, most of the action was just at the end, and it was a very dry description of the action for the most part, where the movie's a lot of nonstop action.
Yeah. Yeah, the book, yeah, for um, a story called Starship Troopers, you think there would be a lot of action in it, but there's really not. I mean, I guess if you consider some of the basic training stuff that he goes through in the book, like where they are in, I think it's in Alberta or somewhere in Canada, that's kind of, but it's not what we would really consider like traditional action.
No, because the even the training that Johnny Rico goes through in the movie, it's really a traditional movie drill instructor boot camp type situation, where in the book they go into all the psychology and the philosophy behind the pedagogy of why they train their soldiers, and that's more of
Yeah.
it than anything of it's conversations between his drill instructor and the major, and it's conversations. It really like you were saying, it's very little to do with the actual action, which I thought that was really interesting. The parts in the book about the why they train the soldiers the way they did in that way was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of flips on the head in terms of like the mean old drill instructor and exactly like why they're training the soldiers the way they do. I mean, it's a fair amount to get into here, but I suggest everybody read the book. Like I know it's one of my favorite books. I mean, it helped me a lot in terms of just navigating this world as I grew up and just comparing myself to the soldiers in the book and the struggles that they have and the outlook that the Federation has on the world. And people probably judge me on that, but I tend to agree with a lot of the way they look at things.
So let's talk about that. In the book and the movie both have the basic premise that to earn citizenship, really the only perk to being a citizen in this society is that you get a right to vote. And the only way to get the right to vote is to be a citizen. They get into the more of the nitty gritty in the book, but what's the overall in the book than they do in the movie? But what's the overall gist of how you become a citizen?
Yeah, so basically they've set up a system where you have to do service to the Federation, military service, and once you finish your service, and I can't remember how like initial, I can't remember how many years it is or what have you, but you got to finish the boot camp or and what have you. Once you finish that service, you're able to vote. If you're in service, you're unable to vote, right? So if you're like career military, you don't have a vote, right? And they set up this system in such a way that again, I mean, it can basically be summed up in a line in the book where like something given has no value, where something earned through blood, sweat, and tears has the ultimate value. And the reason that they've set up the system in such a way that if you're willing to do service and you're willing to potentially pay the ultimate sacrifice, which is your life in defense of the Federation and the collective, by the end of it, you should have a say in how the society is governed. If you're unwilling to do this service, that's fine. From what we gather in the book, most people are able to lead relatively normal lives. Like Rico's father's a successful businessman, and there's a whole economy of people that are never got their citizenship. That's fine, but you're not going to have a say in terms of what direction the Federation is going to be going in.
In a way, when they talk so much about how it's a fascist book, it's almost, I think, a libertarian book of the government is fairly stripped down to its very basics of defense. For the most part, that's all we really see is that the government, its primary purpose is defense of the society. And what they're really saying is that the only people who really have a say in that are the people who have in some way served that defense mechanism of the state. I believe in the book they say that it doesn't necessarily it's not all military service, and that a lot of it's basically almost like a hazing. I think they said it 2 years of service. So you do 2 years of some sort of service and it's all miserable. There's no easy service in the federal service, and a lot of people don't survive it. But if they do, they get this one right and the right to vote. It's not like they get pensions or anything that they describe in the book. In the movie, they kind of drop that a little bit, like you get different perks of free college and stuff like that. But I felt like that was kind of a throwaway in the book. My sense is that the only thing you got out of it was the franchise. Steve here again. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Josh Cohen's Eyewitness History and many other great shows. Go to Parthenon Podcast to learn more. And now, here is a quick word from our sponsors.
I mean, and if you really think about it, well, the one reason that it really works too in the book, in my opinion, is the boot camp, that the hazing that you have to go through is incredibly brutal. So it weeds out people that are just looking, for, I don't know, quickly to get their vote, because that would defeat the whole purpose, right? It's like extremely difficult to get to finish your service and to get that vote. If that process didn't work, the whole purpose of the system that they set up just wouldn't make sense. So to me, it's extremely important that the boot camp is utterly brutal. I mean, you read the book and Rico will tell you all about it.
I wonder, I mean, in our society today, in our Western democracies, it's fairly close to heresy to say that not every person can vote. As long as you reach the age of 18, you're able to vote, and to say anything else is outrageous. And I think in a way that's why Starship Troopers was so outrageous. People found it so outrageous. But what is to say that a society can't decide differently? Who has a say in how the society is run?
I mean, if you look at the majority of human history, this complete enfranchisement that we have, where I think pretty much only prisoners are allowed to vote, this is new. It's the way we're doing it now. This is the new way of doing it. If you look at through most of history, there used to be some kind of requirements. Sometimes it would be military service, sometimes it would be some kind of property requirements, wealth, and there was all different types of well rationalized logical arguments for restricting the franchise. Whereas now the franchise is so wide open. I mean, truthfully, and this will probably get me in a little bit of trouble, the guy that you see walking down the street, right, who is homeless, probably addicted to drugs, just roaming around, what have you, basically has the exact same political power as you, the guy or girl who's going to work every day, raising their family, not breaking the law, not addicted to drugs. And you basically, both of you, same political power. It sets up a perverse incentive structure, does it not? Where the lowest of the low are obviously going to be voting for more and more stuff, right? And you're going to be catering to those people more and more often. I mean, we see it going on in society right now with the middle class getting squeezed more and more and more. It seemed to me it's crazy that we have this complete enfranchisement of the vote. There should be some rite of passage to citizenship. And I mean, what a more fair way that everyone has to go through this same kind of boot camp to earn this right. I mean, we can argue I don't know, other people's argument would be some kind of property right or what have you. But let's just say there's a lot of people out there that don't own property nowadays, right? Everybody can do service, and it's 2 years, and it's open to everybody, and it's 100% democratic. You can choose not to do it, or you can choose to do it. And doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor or super smart or not very smart. Everyone has to go through the same boot camp. It's a rite of passage.
In a lot of ways, I think with the way our system works with voting, it's just cheapened voting to something that you do once a year. And then I've done my duty, if you will, to the society. And now I don't have to do anything else after that because, hey, I voted or I didn't vote. I have the right not to vote. I know in some countries it's illegal not to vote. And to me, that even cheapens it more so that you have to be forced you're forcing people to have buy into the system. That's how your system is being legitimized, is by forcing people to vote, which to me is absolutely mind-blowing. I think that if you want, voting has to be taken preciously, and it has to be taken by people who in some way are doing more. I'm sorry to say this, but just going to vote is not doing your bit for society. Being a leader in your local organizations, that's doing your bit for society. Showing up for work every day and paying your taxes, that's doing your bit for society. Even going and joining a volunteer board in your local city is doing something for society. But just simply going up and for 5 minutes waiting in a line on one day a year is not doing your bit for society. I don't think that's one step towards it, sure, but it's not the be all and end all.
Or scrolling through your Twitter feed or your Facebook or whatever social media you have and looking at tweets and being like, I'm educated about the issues. Like, that's, sorry guys, that's not doing your part. I know that might sound mean, but it's the truth, right? Now people can, you can push back at me about the military service part or what have you, but out of all the sci-fi books and philosophy books, I read a lot. I show you all the books that I read, and I devour books. To me, this is about as fair as it can possibly be. And it's like you pointed out, like there's even up here in Canada, they're talking about forcing people to vote. And I go, if you're forcing someone to vote, then the vote just has no value. It's like, not only are we just giving it to you, we're forcing you to do it. And it's like, okay, well, it's meaningless. Whereas the right to vote should be as meaningful as it possibly can, as it possibly can be. And the only way to do that is to have people earn it, right? If you just give something to somebody, it has no value. And people argue back, well, what about like a Christmas present that your grandmother gave you? And I go, those are different circumstances, and they're arguing disingenuously. They know exactly what I'm saying is, I go to the gym a lot, right? And I pump the iron and improve my physical health and my physique, and I can look myself and I can look at the mirror and I go, you know what? I earned that because I've been going to the gym for years, and I've gone 6 days, 7 days a week, and days that I don't even feel the greatest, I still go, right? Because I can say honestly that I'm proud of it because I earned it. I did that by myself.
Well, then I think that even that your example of getting a gift from your grandmother, what's the preciousness in that gift? If your grandmother gave you, just a little toy or something, or she gave you $1 million, what's the real preciousness of that? Is that somebody who you value gave you something?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're missing things, and maybe in our society, is that the value doesn't always just have to come with the dollar sign in front of it, that there's other things that are of value, like that the right to vote. We should not have this conversation of, only 30% of registered voters went out and voted. Like, that's not the problem. The problem is that 70% of the people don't feel that right that they have is precious enough to go and use.
Yeah, because it has no value. I mean, sorry to beat a dead horse, but like that's a huge theme of the book and the movie. It has no value to them, so why would they really care about it?
Yeah, I mean, it really does. I think it gets down to, I think that's that one huge theme of the book is value, and how much things are really worth, as opposed to just numerical or an accounting value. You get $1 million dropped on your front door versus having earned $1 million, or heck, earned $100, but you actually earned it. I think that you just can't compare those things.
Oh, well, and there's a good quote from the book too. Like, that's about like what we're talking about. The best things in life are beyond money. Their price is in agony, sweat, and devotion. And the price demanded for the most precious of all things is life. In life is life itself, the ultimate cost of perfect value. Basically, what he's saying is like money is, it's really not, when the grand scheme of things, the stuff that's really important, like it really doesn't involve money. It doesn't involve materialism. It involves things that you're willing to put yourself in agony over, devote yourself to, and then maybe in some cases ultimately look yourself in the mirror and am I willing to give my life up for this?
The second big thing with the movie and the book is this fight between humanity and this new species, the bugs. It's an arachnid type insect creature, alien creature that's clearly a hive type creature. And I think that in a way, the on the surface level, you can look at it, it's the individuality of man versus this hive creature. But in a lot of ways, isn't, and maybe push back on this if you don't think, but in a lot of ways, the society of the Federation is trying to create a hive in a way.
Like typically the bugs are kind of, people have interpreted them as like kind of representing communism to a degree, and Robert's society is like a quasi-fascist, militaristic, right-wing society. I mean, I wouldn't call Starship Troopers in the book, the movie's a little bit different, but in the book I wouldn't call it a straight up fascist society, but I mean it's kind of leaning in that direction. I mean, the way I think the society is set up is it's allowing the human individuality to shine in terms of having the choice of whether they want to do service or not do service. But at the same time, channeling it to the collective of the Federation, the collective human species, right? Because that's the thing is, and there's no nations in this book. It's the Federation is the entire planet.
One thing that I liked about the book is that there's another alien species involved, the skinnies, I think they call them.
Yeah.
And I think that throws a twist into it, and it bridges the gap between humanity and the bugs, that there is another group out there and they're all in conflict. And it really this is a book that maybe at some point we'll talk about, is the three body problem, another science fiction book that alien races will probably be so drastically different that we're not going to understand them at all. But the rule of the universe is that all of these races are going to probably just try and want to kill each other, because there's not going to be peace, love, and understanding like Star Trek.
Oh, no. I mean, and if you look at human history, that's not what has really happened when two, diametrically different civilizations have come into contact with one another. I mean, you can look at Native Americans and they were pretty much wiped out. In the case of the Aztecs, they were wiped out. And I don't really see why it would be any different in outer space, to be honest with you. Human beings would probably go into outer space and come to the conclusion it's either us or them, And in the case of the bugs, I mean, who would you rather populating the galaxy, the human species or this bug species?
It could really even be more of a state of nature type thing. It's like animals. A lion just doesn't even think about it if it's going to kill a deer or whatever they kill, and a gazelle or whatever. It just kills because it does. That's what it is. And I think that that's probably, we can't go into expecting that if there is aliens out there, or there are aliens out there, that it's going to be that we're all going to learn from each other and move on. It probably is going to be more of a state of nature, like of a new bacteria goes in and then they just completely colonize and wipe out the other type of bacteria, or like insects do, where one will just take over and completely wipe out the other because that's just what they do.
Yeah. And like me and you've had many conversations about me, fantasizing about outer space or what have you. And I go like, I mean, every civilization that reaches a certain level has a point where it has its own kind of manifest destiny. I mean, America had it and Rome had it and China has it now. And I mean, eventually the human species is going to have it, right? And what would be our manifest destiny is going to be conquering our solar system and then going out, essentially conquering more of the galaxy, would it not?
I mean, I don't know. That's so far off, but I think that the point of this book that people miss, and even other sci-fi, philosophical sci-fi that have thought about this, is that violence is humanity, and violence equals control. I mean, look at our own societies. The whole nation state, the modern Westphalian nation state, was created to have the nation control violence. That's all the nation's real job is. When you get down to brass tacks, is who has the monopoly of violence. That's in the past, in the in the Middle Ages, it could have been a duke or a lord, and the Westphalian, the early modern age, shifted that focus to this idea of the nation state, of who can control violence. But that's really what it boils down to: is society is who controls violence.
Yeah. And then that's a big theme in the book too, where, I think a lot of modern audiences will have a difficult time understanding it, or they'll just dismiss it out of hand. But, in this society, violence is seen as the supreme authority, which all other authority derives from. I mean, people can push back on me about that and say, that's crazy. That's psycho. But in actuality, can you legitimately really argue against that? I don't really think it is. Like, our entire government is built on the monopoly of violence. It doesn't have to be blunt force, like, 1984, boot on the face. But at the end of the day, they hold the keys to all the violence, and it can be, I don't know, it can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used to shut down bank accounts. It can be used sending police officers. It can be used using force. Again, in terms of defense of the country too, they ultimately, that's the government's number one responsibility, is the defense of the nation state, and they hold all the power to defend that nation state, right? I mean, and even if you look at history, I mean, violence in terms of major issues, I'm not talking about a lot of the issues that people argue about on Twitter every day, but like fundamental issues like American independence was decided decisively by the use of violence. They can talk about, the founding fathers can talk about liberty, and they can talk about this, and it was all those things too. But at the end of the day, none of that would have mattered unless they had won battles on the field against the British, right? If you look at Rome and Carthage, we don't really talk about the Carthaginians much anymore. We talk a lot about the Romans, and how did the Romans deal with that conflict, which was an existential conflict to Rome. They used violence, and people can argue whether it's a myth or not. It's irrelevant. They say they salted Carthage's earth, and it's representing that, yeah, we completely destroyed Carthage, and that was never going to come back, and it never did come back. I mean, the city did, but the Carthaginian people never came back. The slavery issue in the United States, that's one of those core issues. It was just never going to get solved without some kind of bloody conflict. Did it have to get as big as the United States Civil War? I don't think so. That could be up for debate, right? But the brewing conflict was going to be decided by force. Those are just three examples, right? Those are three examples right there.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Those are some big issues, but I think when you get to monopoly of violence, you can go back to the U.S. The American Revolution is a perfect example of right after the Revolution, there was the Whiskey Rebellion, and it was people who the central government put a tax on whiskey, and the people who made the whiskey didn't want to pay the tax. There was no discussion about it. George Washington, literally, I can't remember how many, very few years after the war, sent an army and killed U.S. citizens who had just fought for independence for essentially the same issue that the George Washington himself fought the British for. And people put George Washington up to an almost godlike status. They never talk about the Whiskey Rebellion, but he was clamping down because no matter what you say, he understood that that newfound state had to be in control, and there was only one way to do that. It's not you're not going to learn that in probably most of your schooling, or you're going to get a very watered down version of it. But that is the heart of the matter, that a couple of years after George Washington had put up all this flowery verbiage of fighting tyranny, goes around and does something very similar to that. So let's talk about a little bit of what we really liked about this movie. And I'll go back to it again and again and again. I really think that maybe not necessarily Verhoeven himself, but I think that the screenwriter really got the heart of the book. And I think that really comes through of how to put this movie onto film. One of the things that I really liked is switching Johnny Rico from, he was Filipino, but in the movie he's from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And to me, I think that was something that made the movie better than the book. And I'll rarely say that, is that I think as a character arc, it made so much more sense to have them, Dizzy and Ibanez, the other characters from Argentina, because when the bugs, what did they do? They like shot a meteor or something, or an asteroid at Buenos Aires and destroyed it. Like, that created a real drama arc that didn't come through in the book.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I really like that part of it. And yeah, I would say that switch, it made a lot of sense. And then you see like Rico's family dies, and then like his motivation makes a lot more sense. And it kind of shows you, like, even on Paul, like if you're taking Paul Verhoeven's like satirical, like the dangers of propaganda. I mean, yeah, it sums it up right there. It's like, oh, would you fall for the propaganda? It was like, oh yeah, well, I guess if my parents died,
Yeah,
because the bugs fired a meteorite, yeah, I guess I would start listening to it. Yeah, I like that part of it too, and I like the whole like beginning part of it where they're like at school, and it has like a whole like Melrose Place, like Beverly Hills, like 90210 feel to it. I think at one point Paul Verhoeven he wanted actual teenagers to play these roles, and I think they tested it out, and it was just like, no, it's too ridiculous. So they got like the best looking people in all of Hollywood to come and play these roles, and it works perfect.
I can see in one way in the book where Buenos Aires gets zapped by the meteor, and it's maybe they're trying to represent that it's all of society getting zapped by this meteor, and it should affect you no matter if you're from the Philippines or you're from New York City or wherever. It should hurt you. And even though in the book Rico's parents are just for some reason in Buenos Aires and get killed, but I think why cut out the middleman and just have him from Buenos Aires, and it makes all that that last day of high school make more sense in the movie, that they're from Buenos Aires. And I just think overall it was taking what I think Heinlein was maybe going for and like really fleshed it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I think the story in the movie flows better than it does in the book. I think there's no denying that. Just the way, especially like how, like you've pointed out, like that part, just, I don't know, it works better in my opinion.
Then the other thing that I liked really from the movie was combining, and Michael Ironsides played Raychak, and in the book it was two separate characters. His high school teacher, Johnny Rico's moral philosophy teacher, was Colonel Dubois, and Colonel Dubois checks in. He's sort of like Johnny's guardian angel through boot camp, and then he gets him through officers training school. But I loved it how Raychak and really Dubois were combined, because Michael Ironside, he nailed it. I don't think you could have picked anybody better to have played Lieutenant Raychak than Michael Ironsides. He was aloof. Like, didn't you even get the sense that the way Mike Raychak was played in the movie, like he didn't even remember that Rico was in his class?
Yeah, that's the sense I get, where his job is to go in there and just kind of sermonize about what it means to be a citizen, and like the meaning of value, and like the philosophy of society and history, and these kids are just kind of supposed to listen. And whether they choose to actually research any more of the stuff he's talking about is up to them, right? Because they can't fail that class. They just have to, I don't know, it's kind of up here we used to have like civics class, and you couldn't fail it. It would just be them talking about how the government works, and nobody would ever, like, I paid attention to it because I found it interesting, but most of the kids didn't take it serious. I mean, I guess it would be a way of, I don't know, getting a handle whether who would make a good, like the potential people that would make good citizens or not. And that's his job, right?
He played it so it was aloof, but he also deeply cared. It was such a weird combination, but it worked perfectly. I think that they really, that's one thing that I think that they really nailed. Now, what are some of the things that you thought that they really nailed in this movie?
I mean, I think Paul Verhoeven nails the satire brilliantly, and almost too well to a degree. I don't know. We can, like, the music and like a lot of like the battle scenes, the music that's playing through it, and it's Angelo Badalamenti, I believe his name is. He did like the score for Conan, and I believe he did the score for oh no, it's not. No, sorry, that's the guy that works with David Lynch. Is Basil Palador. I can't pronounce his name right now, but he did the score for Conan. He did the score for RoboCop. He's done a lot of Paul Verhoeven's movies, and it's just you can't help but get pumped. Like, you're supposed to kind of be laughing that these guys are like going into battle. Like, it's, I don't know, it's like an interesting fact that I learned researching this movie. Like, the first drop when they're dropping on Clodagh, and it just goes like completely bad. The guy who is getting the troops ready, saying like, "Oh, remember your training, do this and that." That's Gerald Ford's son. I did not know that. Yeah, that's Gerald Ford's son. But to me, what it works so brilliantly is that it shows you how seductive propaganda is. Like, no, I don't understand. Nobody can tell me truthfully that they can watch this movie and just be like, "Oh, I was just kind of a disimpassioned observer about like, oh, this is how propaganda works." You can't help it get sucked in. Like when the one of the top generals is talking about like how the galaxy is going to be for the human species and nobody else. You can't help, like, you just get pumped. Like, it's like, oh yeah, let's sign up, and it, to me, that's why it works so brilliantly, because it shows you how seductive this type of messaging is. And it sounds weird because I was saying like, yeah, I totally support the society or what have you. I mean, I'd sign up, even after seeing how gruesome the battle scenes are or what have you. I mean, if we had an alien species fire a rock at our planet, I mean, yeah, they're attacking, not only my country, they're attacking the entire species.
You think in a way though that they took it almost became silly though. Like, it was so melodramatic, especially with the teenage scenes in high school, that it took that element of it too far.
I don't know. I like it though. Like, I just gotten used to it with like Paul Verhoeven's movies, with like kind of like the cheesy, kind of over the top acting. Because I mean, that's just every single one of his movies, really. I mean, Basic Instinct is like that. RoboCop is like that. I mean, and Starship Troopers, it's heavy, right? But even, yeah, like every one of his movies is, I don't know. I just gotten used to it, right? I know, and I thought it was interesting too, like, in the sense, me and you were like, just from discussing this movie during the week or what have you, he presents it where we're supposed to kind of be laughing at this society, but I'm sure there's a huge segment of the voting audience right now, right? Probably leaning in the right wing, that looks at a Starship Troopers and goes, that's probably not that bad of a society, right? Where another half of it would probably look at it and go, "This is utterly horrifying. It's terrifying. Like, how why would you ever want this?" And I mean, we see it now where left-leaning films, I guess you want to say, were more liberal-leaning films, and there's a huge segment of the audience, the right wings, look at that, and I mean, they're dead serious a lot of the times that they're doing it, and they look at it and they go, "This is absolutely horrifying." So, I mean, and Paul Verhoeven can be making fun of it, but at the same time, the society doesn't look that entirely unappealing, in my opinion.
Now, one of the things that I really didn't like about the movie is, and I think it goes back to that the silliness, and opposed to in the book, they took the military stuff so seriously, but then in the movie, they're just like when the soldiers are fighting the aliens, they're almost running around like a kid who's got ants in their pants. They're like jumping and skipping around, and they call it flagging someone when you pass your muzzle in front of somebody else. I mean, they just do that constantly. And I think that would be one thing that Robert Heinlein is probably spinning in his grave, that he created like this super detailed description of military tactics, and then they do that so silly with all of the battle stuff, where it just would never happen, where everybody is just running around like lunatics, just shooting at everything wildly, like on the Clendathu thing, where the one guy just like starts running out into the middle of like 50 bugs saying, get some," like that. I think Heinlein would be so mad about.
And probably the wasted ammo. Apparently, Starship Troopers still holds the record for most blanks used in a film ever. It still holds the record. Well, that blows my mind. I mean, I think I think they were going to be making 3 films, and I think the idea was it was going to show humanity kind of learning. Or like in World War One, they're just the offensive tactics hadn't caught up to the defensive tactics, and they really didn't know what they were doing. I mean, if you watch the movie, the first drop is right at the bug home planet, Clendathu, and they have like a huge fleet, and it's just a complete and utter disaster. And then they learn, okay, we can't do that, so we got to go after the perimeter planets, and they start going to planet P. And then they start realizing, oh, like they think that it's a hive bug, so there must be some kind of queen or some kind of brain, and they're like slowly learning it as they're going along, but they're kind of just making it up. Really, I thought that's what they were trying to get across. And then if he actually had they did make 2 more movies. It's up to you guys if you want to watch them or not. They're straight to DVD. I mean, if you're like a diehard Starship Troopers fan like me, you probably watch them and enjoy them. But if they were going to make it like with the $100 million budget that this one got, and do 2 proper sequels, I think that would have been a theme that they would have carried over to the other movies. Like, oh, look, they're digging trenches now, and different things, right, where they learn different tactics. The part that blows my mind is like in the first drop, they have all the spaceships are all clustered together, and they realize really quickly that those blue lights that they thought were no big deal were actually rocks that the bugs were shooting from down below. When they go to planet P, though, they do the exact same thing again. I go, do you know what I mean? Like, when you have the ships spaced out a little bit more, or maybe, these guys must have obviously read a lot of history. Why not do like a Blitzkrieg example, like from World War One, and have all the ships just lined up in like one line, right? And then that's where you do the drops from, because it would be, I don't know how accurate the bugs are at throwing these rocks. It just seems like they're just kind of throwing them up there.
Now, to wrap up the movie, what do you think if somebody were going into it for the first time, hasn't read the book? Well, let's wrap it up with that. What do you think? Read the book first, then watch the movie, or watch the movie first, read the book? How would you give it to somebody who has never watched the movie or read the book?
I would say read the book personally, just because I love the book so much. I mean, if you have like a teenager in the house or what have you, or young kid, I would get them to read it, because it helped me a lot in terms of how to view stuff and navigate life. But I mean, if you just want to watch the movie, I don't think you necessarily have to read the book, but it adds to it for sure. I mean, in the book, I mean, in the movie, it's just, it's a fun watch, and our audience members are, smart, so you'll pick up on the satire pretty quickly, right? And you'll probably be thinking about the themes that we've discussed in this podcast.
Yeah, I would, I kind of lean in. If you just want to watch a Friday night movie and pop this on, it's a really fun movie to watch. If you are getting intrigued about some of those ideas, I think the book is something you can read, and it's a probably in an afternoon if you really put your mind to it. It's not a very long read. And I think you would enjoy it a lot, especially to compare and contrast of how somebody envisions how to take a book to a movie. I think that this is a great movie to do that with.
Oh yeah, and I mean, like if you guys I'd seen other Paul Verhoeven movies like RoboCop, and you enjoyed that style. That's that style, but with $100 million budget, right? That's one thing we didn't talk about either. Is the special effects in this movie are insane. Me and you were talking about it. Like this came out in '97, and some of these special effects hold up. Not all of them, but they still hold up to this day because it's a mixture of practical and cutting edge CGI. Yeah, just watch the movie. You'll have fun. You'll enjoy it as much as I did. You probably could tell then was excited to talk about this movie.
That is one thing that's probably worth. I think you could watch this movie, and it's at this point close to 25 years old, and you would not think it's a 25-year-old movie. That combination of the live action, and the right shots that they used, I think it blows out of the way of a lot of these movies that are all just basically the whole movie is green screen. I think those aren't going to stand up as well as this movie that was a really well thought out, well shot, very purposeful movie that you don't get lost, that some of the effects are maybe a little antiquated, but it's not jarring. So, Chris, thanks again for joining us. We're here. Send in your suggestions, and we will talk to you next time.